A diver mapping the Mediterranean was shocked to find a massive bronze horse standing on the seafloor where charts showed nothing but sand. He and his crew hauled the artifact up expecting a fortune, but when they pried open a hidden panel, the discovery inside instantly turned their boat into an active crime scene. Drop a comment with where you're watching from today, and don't forget to subscribe to see what's coming up next. The Mediterranean does not give up its dead easily. It holds them in a suspension of salt and silence, waiting for the right witness to drift by. For Jackson Reed, a man who had spent the better part of 2 decades breathing compressed air and mapping the void, the sea was not a place of romance, but a ledger of lost things. He was a commercial salvage diver and survey specialist, a profession that required the patience of a saint and the cynicism of a coroner. Currently, he was contracted by a telecommunications conglomerate to map a potential route for a fiber optic cable running between the Greek mainland and the scatter of islands in the Cyclades. It was dull, rhythmic work, mowing the lawn, they called it, towing a side-scan sonar unit back and forth across grid squares of empty blue. The Aegean Sea, particularly this stretch south of Kithnos, was deceptively barren on the charts. The depth gauge on Jackson's console read 26 meters, shallow enough for recreational divers, but deep enough that the color red disappeared from the spectrum, leaving everything in shades of bruised blue and gray. He wasn't supposed to be diving today. The remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, usually handled the visual inspections, but the unit's thruster had fouled on a discarded fishing net 2 hours ago. Rather than haul the entire rig up and lose half a day to repairs, Jackson had suited up. He drifted above the seabed, his buoyancy perfectly neutral, his fins moving with slow, efficient strokes that disturbed nothing. The only sound was the rhythmic hiss, pause, hubble of his regulator. Through the faceplate of his mask, the world was a narrow tunnel of visibility. The water was turbid today, a milky suspension of plankton and silt that reduced visibility to perhaps 15 feet. He checked his dive computer, then his compass. He was looking for an anomaly the sonar had painted, a hard return in a field of soft sediment. Usually, these turned out to be shipping containers lost in storms, illegal dumping sites for concrete, or, more often than not, geological formations that looked suspiciously like man-made objects until you got close enough to touch them. But as Jackson finned over a ridge of limestone, the gloom parted. It didn't look like a rock. It rose from the seafloor with a startling, deliberate verticality. Jackson stopped, hovering, his breath catching in his throat, disrupting the rhythm of his regulator. He vented air from his BCD, buoyancy control device, to drop lower, kicking gently, to circle the object. It was a horse. It stood upright, its hooves buried deep in the sediment, anchored by some unseen weight. It was colossal, larger than any living draft horse Jackson had ever seen. The creature was frozen in a posture of alerted stillness, head high, ears pricked forward, neck arched in a powerful curve. Even through the thick incrustation of marine growth, sponges, algae, and calcified worm tubes, the material beneath was undeniable. It wasn't stone. Where a patch of sponge had sloughed off the flank, Jackson saw the dull, oxidized green of bronze. He swam closer, careful not to touch it yet. In the underwater world, touching was a risk. Historic metal could crumble like ash, or startled marine life could strike. He drifted up toward the head. This was the moment that would haunt him later. The craftsmanship was terrifyingly realistic. The eyes of the horse were not blank bulbs. They were detailed, textured, and seemed to possess a frantic intelligence. They stared into the middle distance, looking toward a surface they hadn't seen in centuries. Jackson checked his depth again. 85 feet. The pressure here was roughly 3.5 atmospheres. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with thermoclines. This wasn't a random piece of cargo. A statue this size, standing upright. It felt intentional. It felt like a sentry. He unclipped his GoPro from his chest rig and began to film, the red record light blinking in the dimness. He swept the camera over the musculature of the chest, the detailed mane, the heavy, unnatural girth of the belly. There was something odd about the proportions. The barrel of the horse was too thick, almost swollen. He circled the rear. The tail was thick, braided in an archaic style. Jackson hovered near the flank, squinting. Under a layer of silt, he saw a line. He reached out, his gloved finger brushing away the sediment. It was a seam, a perfect machined line running vertically down the horse's side. He followed it up. It disappeared under a cluster of barnacles, but it was straight. Nature didn't make straight lines. He checked his air. He had plenty of bottom time left, but a heavy feeling settled in his gut. If he reported this to the telecom company, they would note it as an obstruction, reroute the cable 500 yards east, and bury the data. Or worse, word would leak, and the looters, the bane of the Aegean, would be here with dynamite and lift bags within the week. This wasn't just salvage. This was history. Jackson surfaced 20 minutes later, breaking the choppy surface and spitting out his regulator. He climbed the ladder of the Iron Mule, his converted trawler, and didn't say a word to Spiros, his mechanic and winch operator. He went straight to the wheelhouse, stripped off his wetsuit top, and pulled up the satellite phone. He hesitated. The number he was about to dial belonged to a life he had walked away from 5 years ago. Elena, he muttered to himself, the name tasting like salt. Dr. Elena Torres was likely in a lecture hall in Athens or dusting off pottery shards in a basement lab that smelled of formaldehyde and coffee. She was the head of maritime archaeology at the University of Athens, a woman who viewed the ocean as a library and men like Jackson as illiterate vandals who tore pages out of books to sell them. They had been lovers once, then colleagues, then adversaries in a bitter debate over a Roman shipwreck that ended with Jackson walking away from academia to make actual money. He dialed. It rang 4 times. "Torres," she answered, her voice sharp, hurried. "It's Jackson." A silence on the line, long enough to be uncomfortable. "I'm in a meeting, Jackson. If you're calling to ask about the legality of pulling up copper wire from international waters again, the answer is still—" "I found something," Jackson interrupted, his voice low. "Not wire, not junk. I'm sending you a file. Check your secure email in 2 minutes. I don't have time for your treasure hunts, Jackson. It's not treasure, Elena. I don't know what it is, but it's looking at me." He hung up, uploaded the footage from the GoPro, and waited. The Iron Mule bobbed in the swell. 10 minutes passed. The satellite phone chirped. "Where are you?" Her voice was different now. The sharpness was gone, replaced by the breathless, terrifying focus of a predator who has caught a scent. "South of Kithnos, Sector 4. That footage, Jackson, the bridal style, the curvature of the neck. It looks late Hellenistic, maybe early Roman adaptation. But the size, it's impossible. It has to be a composite casting." "It's bronze," Jackson said. "Solid from the sound of it when I tapped it. Or thick, at least." "Stay there," she commanded. "Don't touch it. Don't let your anchor drag near it. And for God's sake, don't post it on Instagram. I'm getting a permit. I'll be there in 6 hours. Elena, I can't sit here for 6 hours. The weather's turning. And you know Demetrius operates in this sector. The mention of Demetrius changed the equation. Demetrius Vargas was a private collector, with a fleet of fast boats and a payroll of lawyers who could tie up the Greek Coast Guard for days while he stripped a wreck clean. I'm leaving now, she said. I'll bring Elias and equipment. We do this right, Jackson. A rescue excavation. No quick grabs. Just get here, Jackson said, looking out at the gray horizon, because I think this thing wants to be found. By the time Elena arrived, the sea had turned a distinct shade of violent gray. She came not on a university research vessel, but on a chartered speedboat, accompanied by Elias, a lanky post-grad student who looked like he'd never seen the sun, let alone a Sea State 3. They transferred to the Iron Mule with Pelican cases full of gear. Elena hadn't changed much. She still wore her hair tied back in a severe utilitarian knot, and her eyes were still the color of flint. She didn't hug Jackson. She set up her laptop on the chart table and played the footage on a loop. It's magnificent, she whispered, tracing the screen. See the articulation of the fetlock? The artist understood anatomy perfectly. This wasn't a decorative piece for a garden. This was a tribute, or a votive offering. It's standing upright, Jackson pointed out, pouring coffee for the team. That's the part that bugs me. How does a statue fall off a ship and land on its feet? It didn't fall, Elena said, looking up. It was lowered, or the ship sank beneath it and rot away, leaving the heaviest object in situ. The base must be lead-weighted. We need to move it, Jackson said. The wind is picking up from the north. If we get a storm, the surge could topple it. If it falls, bronze that old will shatter. The debate between preservation and protection was short. The threat of weather and looters forced their hand. They initiated the protocol for an emergency recovery. The lift was a nightmare of engineering. Bronze is strong but brittle. It has no yield strength. It doesn't bend. It snaps. Jackson and Spiros spent 3 hours underwater, fighting the current, constructing a cradle out of webbing and soft lift straps. They couldn't just wrap a chain around the neck. The head would pop off. They had to support the belly, the chest, and the rear. Jackson worked close to the statue. Up close, the presence of the thing was overwhelming. The sheer mass of it blocked out the dim surface light. As he fed a strap beneath the belly, his hand brushed the metal. He felt vibrations. The current humming against the hollows of the bronze? No, it felt deeper. A resonance. He signaled to Spiros. Thumbs up. Ready to lift. They inflated the lift bags slowly. These were not the rapid ascent bags used by treasure hunters. These were variable volume parachutes controlled from the surface. The goal was to make the horse neutrally buoyant, then gently winch it up. Bag 3 is taking tension, Elias called out from the deck, monitoring the pneumatics. Underwater, the horse shifted. A cloud of silt exploded from the base. For a second, it looked like the horse was rearing up, breaking free of the earth. Crack. A vibration slammed through the water, hitting Jackson in the chest like a physical punch. One of the webbing straps had slipped, snapping taut against a barnacle-encrusted leg. The horse lurched sideways. "Stabilize!" Jackson yelled into his comms mask. He kicked hard, grabbing the guideline. The 2,000-pound bronze beast swung like a pendulum in the dark water. If it hit the rock wall of the ridge, it was over. "Winch up! Give me tension!" The cable tightened. The horse straightened, ascending slowly, spinning lazily. Jackson ascended with it, watching for leaks in the bags, watching the metal. As they passed, the thermocline at 40 feet, the water cleared. The sunlight hit the statue for the first time in 2 millennia. The green patina flared into emerald and turquoise. It was ghostly and majestic, a drowned god rising from the underworld. When they finally broke the surface, the iron mule listed heavily to the port side. The crane groaned, the hydraulics screaming against the load. "Set it down, gently," Elena was shouting, running back and forth on the deck, terrified for the artifact. With a final, heavy thud, the bronze horse settled onto the wooden blocks prepared on the deck. The ship corrected its list. The crew stood back, breathing heavy, soaked in spray. Silence descended on the deck. The horse towered over them, 7 feet high at the shoulder. On land, stripped of the water's buoyancy, it looked alien, a monster of metal. "It's heavier than it should be," Spiros said, wiping grease from his hands. The crane gauge peaked at 3 tons. A hollow casting this size should be half that. Elena was already inspecting the surface, scraping away algae with a plastic spatula. Maybe the clay core is still inside. Sometimes they didn't remove the casting core. Jackson grabbed a hose and began to spray the statue with fresh water, washing away the salt and slime. As the muck ran off, details emerged: the intricate braids of the mane, the terrifying realism of the teeth bared in a silent whinny, and the seams. "Elena," Jackson said, shutting off the hose, "look at this." He pointed to the flank. Now that it was clean, the line he had seen underwater was undeniable. It ran from the ribs to the hip, and there was another one on the other side. "That's not a casting seam," Jackson said. "Casting seams are rough, usually filed down. This is a gap, a tolerance." Elena ran her fingernail along it. "It's a panel," she whispered. "A removable panel." "Why would a statue need a service hatch?" Jackson asked. Elias, the student, was near the head. "Professor, the nostrils." They moved to the front. The horse's nostrils were flared wide. Elias shone a penlight into one. "It goes back deep. I can't see the end of it. It's a pipe. It doesn't connect to the main cavity loosely. It's plumbed." Jackson stepped back, wiping water from his face. The unease he had felt on the seafloor was crystallizing into something sharper. "It's not a statue," he said. "It's a vessel." "A vessel?" Elena frowned. "Like a container?" "Like a submersible," Jackson said. "Or a bell." "That's anachronistic," Elena scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. "The Greeks had simple diving bells, yes, but nothing like this." "Check the rear," Jackson said. "The tail." They moved to the back. Jackson took a wire brush and gently scrubbed the area beneath the tail. The corrosion was thick here, a cement of rust and calcium, but as the metal emerged, they saw it, a square indentation. Inside, a heavy iron pin fused to the bronze. "It's a locking mechanism," Jackson said, "accessed from the outside." "And the inside?" Elena asked. Jackson looked at the panel seams. "If that pin slides, the panels unlock. It's a door." The radio in the wheelhouse crackled to life, shattering the moment. "Unidentified vessel at coordinates 37 north, 24 east. This is the motor yacht Apollonia. You are operating in a zone of exclusive research interest." Jackson swore. "Demetrius, he can't touch us," Elena said. "We have the permit pending. We are under university flag. He doesn't care about flags. He cares about what's inside that horse. If he thinks it's filled with gold coins or ancient scrolls, he'll board us." Jackson looked at the horizon. A white speck was moving fast toward them. We have maybe 20 minutes before he's in hailing range, an hour before he can get a lawyer or a gunman on board. "What do we do?" Elias asked, his voice trembling. "We prove it's a historical artifact and not a treasure chest," Jackson said. "We open it now." "We can't just crack it open," Elena protested. "We need a sterile environment, controlled humidity." "Elena," Jackson grabbed her shoulders, "if Demetrius takes this, he will cut it open with an angle grinder in a warehouse in Albania. If we open it now and document it, it's a registered archaeological find. He can't claim salvage on a body of scientific work." She looked at the approaching boat, then at the horse. She nodded. "Do it." Jackson went to his toolbox. He didn't take the angle grinder. He took a pneumatic micro drill and a set of diamond-tipped burrs. He needed to be surgical. The team gathered around the rear of the horse. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the deck. The only sound was the high-pitched whine of the drill as Jackson worked on the corroded iron pin. "Heat is the enemy," Jackson muttered. "Spiros, keep the water spray on the drill bit." Minutes stretched. The white yacht grew larger on the horizon. They could see figures on the bridge with binoculars. "Almost there." Jackson gritted his teeth. The drill bit through the last of the corrosion. The iron pin vibrated. "Hand me the mallet." He took a rubber dead-blow hammer. He placed a brass drift against the pin. He struck it once. Nothing. He struck it again, harder. Clang. A groan of metal. The pin moved. "The internal latch is disengaging," Jackson said. He moved to the side panel. "Elias, grab the suction cups. We need to pull the panel outward. It won't be on hinges. It'll be a friction fit." They attached heavy-duty glass lifting cups to the bronze flank. "On 3, Jackson said. 1, 2, 3, pull!" They hauled back. For a moment, nothing happened. The seal of 2,000 years held fast. Then, a sound that made the hair on Jackson's arms stand up. Hiss. It wasn't just a mechanical sound. It was the sound of pressure equalizing. The air inside the horse was different from the air outside. The panel popped loose. A dark gap appeared. And then the smell hit them. It was instantaneous and revolt-inducing. The crew recoiled, coughing. It wasn't the smell of rot, exactly. It was the smell of stagnation so profound it felt toxic. It smelled of old copper, sulfur, biological decay, and concentrated terror. "Masks!" Elena yelled, pulling her shirt over her nose. Jackson didn't pull away. He grabbed the edge of the panel and wrenched it free. The heavy bronze plate clattered onto the deck. He shone his tactical light into the void. The beam cut through the darkness of the cavity. The interior was not empty. It was not filled with amphorae of wine or chests of gold. "Oh my God," Elena whispered. Curled in the bottom of the horse's belly, resting on the curved bronze floor, was a pile of rags. But as the light moved, the rags defined themselves. Tattered leather, remnants of a tunic, and bone. A human skeleton lay in the fetal position, its knees drawn up to its chest. The skull was turned upward, the jaw unhinged in a silent, eternal scream. "It's a coffin," Elias said, horrified. "No," Jackson said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion as his mind processed the details. "Look at the walls." He moved the beam to the interior surface of the bronze panels they hadn't removed. The metal was scarred. Deep, frantic gouges marred the smooth bronze. They were everywhere, around the latch, around the seams, near the head. "Scratch marks," Jackson said. "He didn't die instantly. He was trying to get out." Elena leaned in, her archaeologist's eye taking over the shock. leather skins. She pointed to the rotted bags around the skeleton. Water skins. He had supplies. And that? She pointed to a corroded lump near the hand. A dagger. A short sword. He was a passenger, Jackson realized. The horse, it was a Trojan horse, literally. The realization washed over them, chilling them more than the sea ever could. The legend, Elena said, her voice shaking. We always thought it was a myth, or a metaphor for a siege tower. But what if it was literal? A way to smuggle a high-value target past a blockade? He sealed himself in. Jackson reconstructed the scene. Someone locked him in from the outside. The plan was probably to load the statue onto a ship, sail past the enemy fleet, maybe Roman, maybe Macedonian, and then unlock him when they reached safety. But the ship sank, Jackson finished. The ship went down in a storm. The horse is heavy. It sank straight to the bottom, upright. He looked at the nostrils. The vents. They let air in when it's on deck, Elena said, tears forming in her eyes. But underwater. They let water in, Jackson said, but slowly. The pipes are narrow. It wouldn't have flooded instantly. He would have heard the ship breaking up. He would have felt the free fall. Then the impact. Jackson looked at the scratches again. He was alive down there, in the dark, at 80 feet, the water trickling in through the nose, the pressure building, the air running out. The horror of it was absolute. The treasure was a torture chamber. A loud horn blasted across the water. The Apollonia had arrived. Demetrius Vargas stood on the bow of his yacht, a white linen suit glowing in the twilight. He held a megaphone. 2 large men stood behind him, arms crossed. "Captain Reed," Demetrius's voice boomed, "you are in possession of artifacts recovered from a zone under my salvage claim. Prepare to be boarded." Jackson looked at the skeleton. He looked at the scratch marks. A cold, hard anger replaced his fear. He wasn't protecting a piece of metal anymore. He was protecting a witness. "Stay here," Jackson told Elena. He walked to the gunwale. The Apollonia was pulling alongside, fenders deployed. "This is a crime scene," Jackson yelled back. "Do not board." "It is a statue, Jackson." Demetrius laughed. "Don't play games. We know you found the bronze stallion. We'll take it off your hands. We'll even pay you a finder's fee." Standard rates. The yacht bumped against the iron mule. One of Demetrius's men prepared to jump across. Jackson grabbed the detached bronze panel. He walked to the opening in the horse's flank. "You want to see what's inside?" Jackson shouted. "You want the gold? Come look." Demetrius signaled his man to wait. He stepped onto the rail, intrigued. "Show me." Jackson stepped aside and aimed the massive floodlight directly into the hole. The stark, white light illuminated the interior with brutal clarity. The skeleton, the rags, the claw marks on the wall, the rictus of the screaming jaw. Demetrius froze. He was a thief, a smuggler, a man of greed, but he was Greek. And in Greece, the dead are heavy. The sight of the tomb, the sheer, visceral nightmare of a man buried alive in bronze, punched through his avarice. "It's not a chest," Jackson said, his voice carrying over the water. "It's an escape pod, and he's still inside." Demetrius stared for a long time. The wind whistled through the rigging. The 2 men behind him looked uncomfortable, crossing themselves. "Bad luck," one of the mercenaries muttered, "to disturb a grave like that. That is Kakuticha." Demetrius lowered the megaphone. He looked at Jackson, then at Elena, who was standing protectively in front of the opening. He realized that there was no way to sell this quietly. This wasn't an art piece. It was a horror story, and now that it was open, the world would know. "You have notified the authorities?" Demetrius asked, his voice subdued. "The ministry is en route," Jackson lied, though he knew they would be soon. "This is a grave, Demetrius. Walk away." Demetrius looked at the skeleton one last time. He shuddered, a visible ripple of superstition overcoming greed. "We were never here," he said. He signaled his captain. The yacht reversed engines, churning the water, and peeled away into the darkness. Jackson sagged against the rail. The adrenaline crashed. He looked back at the horse. Elena was inside the cavity now, taking photos, weeping silently. She wasn't crying for the discovery. She was crying for the man. "We need to cover him," Jackson said softly, "until the coroner gets here." They found a tarp. They draped it over the opening, but not before Jackson touched the scratch marks one last time. He felt a strange sense of connection to the man. Jackson had spent his life diving, always afraid of the dark, always afraid of running out of air. This man had lived his worst nightmare. 18 months later. The National Archaeological Museum in Athens was quiet. It was a Tuesday morning, and the crowds were thin. Jackson stood in the center of the new wing, dressed in a suit that felt tight across his shoulders. In the center of the room, bathed in dramatic lighting, stood the horse. It had been stabilized, cleaned, and mounted. It was breathtaking. But the curators had made a bold choice. They hadn't put the panel back on. They had installed a clear acrylic sheet over the opening in the flank. Inside, the skeleton was gone, buried properly in a ceremony attended by dignitaries, but the scratch marks remained. They were lit from the inside, casting long shadows. Elena walked up beside him. She looked tired but proud. "The DNA results came back fully," she said quietly. "Matches the lineage of the Antigonid dynasty. We think it was Prince Perseus or a close relative. He vanished from history around 168 BC during the Roman conquest. They said he fled to sea and was never seen again." "He almost made it," Jackson said. "The engineering was brilliant," Elena said. "The air intake, the weighted keel. If the ship hadn't hit that storm, he would have washed up in Egypt and changed history." "But he didn't," Jackson said. He looked at the horse's face. The eyes, which had terrified him underwater, now seemed different. They didn't look frantic anymore. They looked patient. "You know," Jackson said, "when I found him I thought he was a monster, a giant bronze ghost. And now? Now I think he was a time capsule. He held his breath for 2,000 years just to tell us what happened." Elena took his hand. It was a professional gesture, but there was warmth in it. "You saved him, Jackson. You brought him up. You didn't let him stay in the dark." Jackson nodded. He looked at the scratch marks one last time. He thought of the silence of the deep, the pressure, the cold. He thought of the moment the drill broke through and the air hissed out. The last breath of a prince released into the Aegean air. "He's not waiting anymore," Jackson said. He turned away from the exhibit, walking out of the cool, climate-controlled museum into the bright, chaotic sun of Athens. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air, tasting the dust and the life of the city. He walked toward the harbor where the Iron Mule was waiting, ready to map the next empty stretch of blue. The ocean kept its secrets, but Jackson Reed was no longer afraid of the silence. He knew that even in the deepest dark, there was always a story waiting to be heard.